Man and woman married with 2 kids. Woman announces she's pregnant with her affair partner and she wants a divorce. Divorce was fairly amicable. 2 children are given split custody. The fair baby is born during the 2 years it took for the divorce to finalise. Wife and affair partner are now an official couple. Ex-husband is living alone, trying to recover. On alternating weeks, he picks up his 2 kids. After a few years of this, the ex-wife begins to complain about ex-husband only taking his kids. She wants him to take the affair baby as well. She says him only getting his kids is causing the affair baby to wonder why he isn't like his siblings and that the man they call dad doesn't love him. The new couple also wants time alone. The man reluctantly agrees for the sake of the child. The ex-husband then goes to say how much he hates this kid. The kid is only 4 or 5 at this time, and while he doesn't hate the child, he hates everything the kid represents. This child is a constant reminder of his ex-wife's infidelity, how she out of the blue destroyed his life, how she has chosen to live with someone else. He does not want this kid in his life, taking care of someone he has no blood ties to. He wished the kid didn't exist. My mom was threatening divorce, and my dad was very, very depressed over it. For about a week, I went back and forth from the place my mom was staying and my home where my dad was. I tried to make him feel better, and he kept asking me about my mom, asking me to talk to her, do anything I could to change her mind. I couldn't bring myself to tell him my mom had already made her decision. The night before Father's Day, I was leaving to spend the night with some friends. Before I left, I told him I'll be back early so I could make breakfast for him for Father's Day. He said he'll take a rain check. I didn't think anything of it. I went to a club that night and took some ecstasy. I was at the time also prescribed Adderall and was discreetly taking more than recommended. After an hour of feeling nothing, I began to feel lightheaded and hot. My heart started racing and I could barely think. I begged my friends to take me to the hospital, that something was happening to me. They shrugged it off. Finally, a boy I met that day, who was friends with one of my friends, drove me back to his house. The whole ride home, I was struggling to regulate my breath and heart rate, fearing for my life. When we got to his house, my body began to calm down, leaving me extremely weak and exhausted. I remember laying on his bed, still terrified of what and still could happen. His dog came up to me, jumped on the couch and curled up next to me, making it so his head propped on my leg, a melancholy look on his face. At about 6 a.m., all my friends were home, and after they begged forgiveness for not caring for me like they should have, I asked to be driven home. On the way, I randomly started tearing up, thinking I'll have to ask my dad to take me to the hospital. Something doesn't feel right. When we got to the house, I went to the door to see a note taped onto it. It basically said, "Don't go in the house and call the police. I'm sorry for being such a coward." My already weakened heart dropped. In shock, I called the police, eyes completely dry, that my dad had killed himself. I sat on the porch and cried. There was a lot of crying that day. My mom wailed when she drove up to the house, crying, "Oh my God, oh my God." I was taken to our neighbor's house and put to bed in the guest room. The rest of the day was spent alone, willing my body to survive. There were moments where I felt like it was going to shut down. I was too weak to cry. After a while, I realized it was Father's Day. When I was living in years ago, there was this guy about my age. I was 19 at the time, who was blind and sometimes wandered the streets of my neighborhood selling brooms, which he carried in a bundle in his back. He didn't have a dog or anything, just a staff. I saw him walk by the house where we lived a few times, and I felt kind of sorry for him, but the first few times didn't really think much of it. What struck me about him, I suppose, was that he was my age. Normally, poor people on the streets are very old or very young, or maybe women with children. Here was a dude that looked otherwise healthy, yet was obviously quite destitute, but tried to make a living despite his disability. And believe me, it's quite different to live with a disability in a country like that than it is in France or the US. A few months after I had last seen him, I came home and my mom was having a reunion with some of her lady expat friends, as she did once a week, tea and so on. I stopped by the solarium where they were, said hello to all, and proceeded to grab me a soda and a few pastries. While I was doing this, I picked up on the conversation they were having. It turns out that the day before there had been a murder in a poor neighborhood that bordered ours. Not an unusual occurrence, but what stopped me was one of the ladies saying that they had killed a blind couple. I inquired further, and it turns out that it was this guy. The ladies knew him, of course, because they lived in the same area, and I suppose even bought a broom or two from him at some point. Then it got worse. He lived in a little house with his wife, who was also blind. Apparently she worked doing needlepoint or something like that. Men, number unknown, had broken into their house at night, assaulted the guy. I mean, how could he defend himself? And while he was lying on the floor bleeding, raped his wife repeatedly. Then they stabbed her and kicked the guy's head in against the concrete floor of the house as they were leaving, killing him. She was still alive when they found her the next morning, but she died later. These were two disabled kids who had rallied against poverty and discrimination and tried to make it in the world on their own. They didn't deserve it. I think this has stuck with me over the years as something very sad, because I always remembered seeing the guy walking slowly with his staff clicking on the pavement, yelling out, "Brooms, brooms," and I wanted to come over and talk to him, ask him what his name was, if he had been born that way, and maybe help. Hell, maybe even buy a broom I didn't need. But I never did it. I could never shake the feeling that maybe I could have done something for him and his wife if I had known she existed, that maybe I could have prevented that from happening to them. His name was Ernesio, and his wife's name was Zoila. I never saw or met Zoila, but I think I'll remember her and his husband until the day I die. When I was a kid, I had 3 dogs, 2 males, King and Frank, and a female, Maya. Anyways, King always acted dominantly, and for years he would regularly beat up Frank to prove his superiority. One day Frank had enough of it and attacked King. His entire chest was torn up. He barely survived surgery. Within a week, his kidneys had failed and he died. My dad nearly put Frank down, but instead he gave him away and I never saw him again. I helped bury King, and while he was laying in a blanket as we dug, Maya came and sat by his body. 2 weeks later, I woke to find her dead in her doghouse. She had no visible signs of injury and had been healthy. She was buried by morning. It might not compare to other people's stories. They're only dogs anyways, but it was really hard losing all 3 of my childhood dogs, friends I had known my entire life, within a few weeks. I haven't cried ever since I buried Maya. country. When I was a small boy, I used to see poor street kids outside. They wore rags, were often hungry, dirty. They were paupers, illiterate, and uneducated. I'm not sure whether they had parents. Most didn't. Some would have their limbs broken by unscrupulous people so they could elicit more sympathy as they begged for money. A truly heart-wrenching sight. They would often sift through the rubbish for their food. It was very sad seeing this, even when I was a young boy, seeing that they weren't that different from me. But there was this one poor girl. Her parents must have died or something, for I would often see her going from house to house begging for food. Sometimes people would throw scraps of food out for the dogs, and I would often see her eating those scraps with them. Like the others, her clothing barely sufficed to hide her nakedness. It would do for the summer, but in the winter, she would struggle. And so winter came. I recall me starting school and me feeling sorry for her that she didn't go. It was an especially cold night, one where it snowed. The temperature must have been below zero for sure. I recall her knocking on the door, banging, pleading for someone to let her in. My mother answered the door and scolded her, telling her to go away. These street kids were treated worse than those slum dogs. The door was slammed. She was still outside, knocking, pleading for some respite from the bitter wind. But to no avail. The night passed as normal. I dressed to go to school the next day. It snowed all night. Everything was white outside, glistening in the sun. Outside, I saw a strange lump of snow just near the doorstep. It was as if somebody left some rocks there overnight. I uncovered the snow, curious to see what underneath, when then, all of a sudden, I recoiled back in horror. It was the poor child, frozen solid in the snow. She died outside our very doorstep. In the cold, I was shocked, and my heart welled up with guilt and pity for her. Why didn't my poor old mother let her in? Why didn't I let her in? Surely if I asked my mother, she would have taken